Most men fear the dark because they think it hides monsters. In the Skogrim, the dark itself is hungry, and tonight, it chose Eirik. Eirik had spent half his life in the wilds, but even he knew when a forest felt wrong. The Skogrim woods were dense and endless, filled with tangled roots and sour earth. This was the stretch people circled around on the old road. No one hunted here, no one gathered wood, not since last spring when the disappearances began. The ground was slick, soft with rot. The undergrowth tangled in Eirik's boots, each step noiseless, swallowed by layers of damp leaves. Sunlight filtered in, sickly and pale, as if the canopy itself tried to choke it off. He wasn't here for gold or glory, just answers. A boy from the southern farmstead had vanished, leaving nothing but a trail of blood and torn cloth stretching into the Skogrim. Eirik had seen what wolves could do. This was no wolf's work. With every step, the trees seemed to crowd closer. The moss hung thick as fur. Ravens perched high overhead, watching with black, silent eyes. Eirik pressed onward, jaw set, knuckles white around his axe. A faint stench crept through the air, sharp as sour milk. Eirik followed it deeper into the gloom, boots squelching. The forest floor dropped away into a shallow gully where the mud was churned and flecked with shreds of torn fur. He crouched, examining the marks. Too many claw marks. Too many broken branches, no tracks, just scars. Somewhere high above, the crows took flight all at once, black shapes wheeling against the pale sky. Eirik straightened, gaze fixed on the darkness between the trees. The woods felt hungry, restless, as if the forest itself was waiting for something to cross its threshold. Eirik pressed deeper into the Skogrim, careful with each step. The air grew colder, heavy with the stink of wet earth and something rank beneath it, a coppery note that clung to the inside of his nose. He found more signs of struggle. A patch of brambles lay flattened, stems snapped, as if something massive had crashed through. Shreds of gray cloth dangled from the thorns. Eirik ran his fingers along the fabric. It was still damp, streaked with dried blood. Beyond the brambles, the ground dipped into a hollow thick with reeds and sucking mud. He saw more claw marks gouged into the black earth, deep and spaced too wide for any animal he knew. He counted 6 in each arc. No bear, no wolf, nothing he'd ever hunted left marks like these. The trees here grew twisted, their bark slashed and weeping pale sap. Insects buzzed around the wounds, but otherwise the forest was silent. No bird calls, no wind, just the slow drip of sap onto the leaves. Eirik kept moving, following the broken trail. Every so often he stopped, listening to the stillness. Once he thought he saw a shape moving far between the trunks. A pale, hunched thing that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He checked his axe, kept his shoulders square. The forest behind him felt like a mouth closing shut. Somewhere ahead, something dragged itself through the gloom, leaving a path of ruin in its wake. The forest closed in tighter, pressing Eirik along a path that wasn't a path at all, just a strip of bare earth, raked with gouges and streaked with old blood. The stench grew stronger, a blend of rot and sour meat that made him breathe shallow. He stopped at a tree unlike the others, an ancient ash, bark stripped clean in a spiral up its trunk. Around its base, the ground was churned and muddy, and a circle of small animal skulls lay half buried in the moss, picked clean and arranged with eerie precision. Eirik crouched and studied the marks on the ash. They weren't claw marks. They were symbols, crude but deliberate. Old runes scraped in haste and nearly erased by the weather. He traced one with a fingertip and felt the wood pulse beneath his touch, as if the tree itself recoiled. A distant creak echoed through the woods. For a moment, the light faded as if a cloud had passed over the sun. Eirik looked up, heart pounding, but the sky was as gray as ever. He straightened, turning away from the marked ash, every muscle tense. This was no ordinary beast's territory. Something had claimed this place long before he arrived. The trail ahead wound into darkness, the ground sloping down toward a tangle of brush and shadow. Eirik hesitated, then pressed on, the rune's memory burning cold in his mind. The silence grew absolute, heavy as stone. Eirik slid down the slope, boots sinking into the mire at the gully's bottom. Each step was a struggle. The mud sucked at his feet and filled the air with the smell of rotting roots. Gnats swarmed his face, but he barely noticed. His focus stayed fixed on the strange trail snaking through the reeds. Bones jutted from the muck, deer, fox, and some too small or twisted to name. All of them showed the same wounds, deep gashes, crushed ribs, missing heads. Eirik stepped carefully around them, never turning his back to the gloom behind. The reeds grew taller and denser, and the sunlight shrank to a few thin slivers. Something enormous had passed through, flattening everything in its path. Eirik knelt and pressed his palm to the earth. It was cold, and he could feel a faint tremor beneath the surface, like something burrowing just out of sight. He listened for any hint of movement. There was nothing. No birds, no water, not even wind. The hush was so total it hurt his ears. Still, he pressed forward, hand always on his axe. As he moved, he noticed the reeds ahead bending and parting, though there was no breeze. A ripple moved through them, low to the ground and much too quick. Eirik froze, heart pounding, and watched the motion vanish into shadow. He pushed on, determined not to let fear anchor him in the muck. The further he went, the more the earth stank of old blood and strange decay. The trees ahead grew denser and darker, promising no comfort, only secrets. The forest, it seemed, was waking up. The ground began to rise, firmer beneath Eirik's boots. He followed the broken trail into a clutch of ancient oaks, their trunks hollowed by rot and age. Some openings gaped wide enough for a man to crawl inside, though none with any sense would try. The smell leaking from those hollows was unbearable, a blend of mildew, damp fur, and the sour stench of something long dead. Eirik stopped at the largest tree, where the mud outside was disturbed, clawed and gouged into deep grooves. The opening yawned black, pulsing with flies. He knelt and peered inside, letting his eyes adjust. A nest of bones lay tangled in the shadows, all stripped and snapped. Among them, a single heavy chain was half buried, rusted nearly through. Eirik pulled it loose, studying the links. It was old, older than the farmsteads, older than the road, its iron pitted with age. There was dried blood on it, but the stains were recent. He listened. Something shuffled deep inside the hollow, too heavy for a rat, too slow for any fox. Eirik rose and stepped back, weapon ready, but nothing emerged. The silence was punctuated by the slow drip of water and the uneasy groan of old wood. He marked the spot, memorizing the trees and the scarred earth. The beast had made its den here, but it was not inside. The tunnel sloped deeper into darkness where cold air flowed from the roots. Eirik tightened his grip on the axe. If the thing had left its nest, it would return, and he meant to be waiting. Eirik circled the hollow, searching for fresher signs. The evening light filtered weakly through the leaves, painting everything in bands of gray and green. He found more evidence scattered among the roots, chunks of flesh, half-eaten and crawling with flies, a length of torn hide still wet with blood. The wounds on the remains were ragged, the bites too wide for any wolf. A wide swath of crushed grass led away from the tree, weaving between thickets and ferns. Eirik followed, stepping lightly, careful not to disturb the pattern. The mark suggested something that dragged itself forward with its forelimbs, leaving a deep trough in the earth. Every so often, a clawed handprint pressed into the mud. 6 long fingers, each ending in a split, blunted nail. The trail grew fresher as he pressed on. The stench sharpened, tinged with ammonia and rot. He saw broken branches high above his head, as if the thing had tried to climb or had dropped from above. A flock of crows took off all at once from a nearby limb, screaming their displeasure as they vanished into the dusk. Eirik crouched low, listening for movement, eyes narrowed to the gloom. He could feel the thing's presence, close, but not close enough to see. He tightened the straps on his axe hand, willing his nerves to hold steady. Somewhere out there, the beast was circling, perhaps watching, waiting for him to stray too far from the hollow. Night pressed in around him, thick and damp, promising more dangers than just claws and teeth. Darkness fell in slow layers, settling over the Skogrim like a shroud. Eirik moved with caution now, every sense stretched taut. The forest's stillness pressed in, broken only by the distant call of an owl and the rustle of unseen things in the leaves above. He followed the fresh trail to a clearing ringed with ancient stones, half sunken and slick with moss. At the center, the grass lay flattened, smeared with old blood. Eirik crouched, searching for fresh clues, and felt the hair on his neck rise. A sound came from above, a soft clicking, almost thoughtful. Eirik looked up, eyes tracing the tangled canopy. For a long moment, he saw nothing but leaves and shadow. Then he saw them. A cluster of pale eyes, reflecting the faintest hint of starlight, peering down from high in the branches. The creature's body was all wrong, stretched and bunched, limbs clinging spider-like to the upper limbs of the oak. Its flesh shimmered with a greasy pallor, mottled with streaks of black and sickly yellow. It watched him, silent and patient, long claws curling around the bark. Eirik stood his ground, pulse hammering. He did not raise his axe, not yet. The thing made no move to attack. Instead, it shifted in slow, deliberate motions as if testing his resolve. The eyes blinked, one after another, lids sliding sideways like those of a lizard. The forest seemed to lean in, waiting for what would come next. Eirik felt the weight of every story he'd ever heard about the Skogrim, every warning ignored. The monster was real, and now it knew his scent. Eirik stared up at the thing in the branches, willing his hands to stay steady. The creature watched him for several heartbeats, its cluster of eyes unblinking, claws flexing against the wood. Then, with a slow and unnatural grace, it began to descend, body elongating as it crept down the trunk, every joint bending the wrong way. Eirik took a step back, weighing his options. The axe felt light in his grip, heavier with the promise of what might come next. He braced himself, feet set wide. The creature dropped the last several feet, landing without a sound. Its bulk was greater than he'd guessed, all sinew and mottled hide, limbs ending in too many fingers. It raised its head and opened its mouth, not to roar, but to let out a soundless yawn, revealing rows of jagged, translucent teeth. It lunged. Eirik dodged aside, swinging his axe in a wide arc. The blade caught the creature's side, tearing flesh, but no blood spilled, only a gray ooze, thick and cold as clay. The monster recoiled, hissing with a voice that vibrated more in the ground than the air. Eirik pressed the attack, chopping at a limb that darted for his leg. The blow struck home, but the creature's flesh closed almost instantly, wounds sealing over with a wet pop. It circled, cautious now, wary of his weapon. He drew a ragged breath, sweat burning his eyes. The monster shifted back, slinking into the undergrowth. In moments, it vanished among the shadows, leaving behind only its stench and the churned earth of the clearing. Eirik stayed tense, listening for its return. The night pressed close, and the stories felt far too real. Eirik held his ground long after the creature vanished, axe ready, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The clearing felt suffocating now, every whisper of wind in the branches overhead a possible threat. He circled the stone ring, scanning for any sign of movement, but the forest kept its secrets. After several minutes, he forced himself to move on, wary of staying exposed. He slipped into the trees, picking a route that kept his back to thick trunks and his path unpredictable. The monster's trail, faint as a ghost, wound through the undergrowth, a smear of gray ooze on roots, a broken fern here and there. As he moved, the forest shifted around him. He could feel the creature's presence, never close enough to see, but always near enough to unsettle his nerves. Every so often, he caught a glimpse of pale flesh slipping behind a tree, or heard the faint rhythmic clicking from high above. Eirik pushed on, sweat chilling on his skin. He tried to stay silent, but the woods seemed to amplify every movement, every breath, as if the very air betrayed him. Twice, he caught his foot on something slick. Both times it was a length of grayish tissue, like a shed snake skin, warm and pulsing as if it had only just been discarded. The moon finally broke through the canopy, casting pale light across the trunks. Eirik pressed deeper, jaw set, determined to keep the monster in sight, even if he had to walk until sunrise. The feeling of being watched never left him. Somewhere in the gloom, the monster waited, patient as hunger. Eirik's boots found firmer ground as the forest thinned for a stretch. He seized the opportunity, circling wide around a tangled thicket until he reached a shallow rise of stone, one of the few places the creature's bulk would have to cross in the open. He knelt, searching for tools, and found what he needed: broken branches, a few sturdy rocks, and the length of old chain he'd carried since the hollow tree. He worked quickly and quietly, lashing the chain across a narrow gap between two trunks. He scattered leaves and moss over the metal and wedged sharpened sticks beneath. Points angled toward the trail where the creature's tracks smeared the mud. Sweat streaked Eirik's brow. Every moment felt stolen. He forced himself to ignore the twitch of branches overhead, the cold certainty that eyes watched from somewhere just out of sight. Finished, he crouched low, axe ready, and waited in the hush. The minutes dragged on. The moon climbed, dim and veiled by high clouds. Night insects fell silent as the air grew colder, thick with the promise of violence. The stillness broke all at once, a crashing, thrashing sound as something massive barreled through the brush. The trap rattled. Eirik sprang to his feet just as the monster's pale form slammed into the hidden chain, shrieking as metal bit deep and wooden stakes drove up into its flesh. The beast twisted, flailing. The ground churned with ooze and dirt. Eirik charged in, raising his axe for the fight he knew he couldn't avoid. The battle was on. The monster thrashed against the chain, ripping at the earth, claws scoring deep furrows in the stone. Eirik swung his axe with everything he had, burying the blade in one of the creature's writhing limbs. Gray ooze splattered, stinging his skin, cold and slick. The creature shrieked, every eye rolling white in the moonlight. Its free limbs struck out, one catching Eirik across the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. He rolled aside just in time to avoid a crushing blow, boots scraping on slick stone. He scrambled to his feet, blood pounding in his ears. The trap held, the chain biting deep into the beast's bulk, the sharpened stakes anchoring it in place. Eirik seized the axe and struck again, hacking at the writhing mass with desperate fury. Each blow split flesh, but the wounds refused to bleed red. Only more of that thick, cold slime poured out. The monster's mouth split wider, rows of teeth glinting as it lunged for him. Eirik dodged, swinging low, severing a limb that kept twitching long after it hit the ground. The thing recoiled, shrieking, but the chain and stakes held fast. Eirik pressed his attack, relentless. He drove the axe into the thing's torso again and again, until its shrieks faded to ragged gurgles. The forest filled with the sound of splitting flesh and breaking bone. At last, the monster sagged against the trap, shuddering, eyes blinking out one by one until none glimmered in the dark. Its body slumped, twitching, motionless at last. Eirik staggered back, chest heaving, axe dripping with that unholy ooze. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Eirik stood over the ruin of the monster, breath ragged, sweat and cold ooze clinging to his skin. The trap was shattered, chain links torn and wooden stakes splintered, but the thing at its center no longer moved. The eyes, so many, so bright in the dark, had gone dull, lids fused shut in the slime. He wiped his axe on the grass, forcing his hands to stop shaking. Around him, the forest had gone still. Not a single bird called, not a branch stirred. The hush was different now, no longer watchful but heavy, as if the Skogrim itself was waiting to see what he would do next. Eirik circled the corpse, searching for signs that another might linger. He found only the remains of old prey, snapped bones and empty hides, and a stain in the earth where the creature's life had drained away. The monster's flesh began to soften, collapsing inward, dissolving into the soil until only the chain and a blackened patch of ground remained. He stepped back, wary. The crows returned first, wheeling above the trees, then the insects began to sing again. The silence of the Skogrim broke at last, replaced by the ordinary sounds of the living woods. Eirik turned for home, boots muddy, axe heavy, each step dragging the memory of the night behind him. The villagers would want proof, but he knew there was nothing left to bring, just scars in the earth and an unease that would linger as long as the forest stood. As the dawn broke behind the trees, Eirik cast one last look over his shoulder. The woods seemed to close in on the blackened clearing, hiding its secrets once more. Somewhere, deep beneath the roots, the Skogrim remembered everything. If this story left you with a lingering chill, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss one of Eirik's stories. And tell me, if you found yourself alone in those woods, would you trust your instincts or press on until you found the truth? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Cabin of Whispers. See you next time.